Tom, are you okay?
I lost her.
Her?
She was going to be this epic, trilogy-worthy character. I was going to be the hottest writer in Hollywood. But I can't get past Act 1!
You need some writers group therapy. Hello and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers. Are you ready for your session? The doctors are in. And if you like these episodes, make sure you subscribe so you won't miss any new content. Share it with your friends. You can catch us online at writersgrouptherapy.com and also on Twitter and Instagram at WGTherapy. Individually,
I'm Tom_Loveman on Twitter and Tom Loveman on Instagram.
And I'm at Roshni Lumino on Twitter and at Moonlilymusic on Instagram. Wow, we have a lot to talk about today.
I'm excited. I'm so excited for this episode.
There is so much. Later on in the episode, we will be joined by Aron Coleite, who is a writer, producer, showrunner of the current Netflix show Daybreak, among other things. So that'll be a great interview. Definitely stick around for that. But first, let's do some housekeeping. Fellowship deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
They've changed. It's weird. Have you been applying to anything lately or not really?
I've been so busy with other projects, I haven't even thought about it. So no, but I know you're always on top of that.
I will admit right now to being a bit of a planner nerd who keeps a nice detailed list of when every writing fellowship hits during a year. So like when the submission period normally opens. I'll be honest, a lot of these deadlines have not changed in years. So you always kind of know, like in the spring, apply to these 5 things.
Like May, June, usually. Yeah.
The CAPE Fellowship deadline is now, if you're listening. And CAPE is Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. They do writing fellowships and they also do directing/producer fellowships. I've never applied to that side of it, so I don't know much about it. But usually their fellowship window is December, and it's kind of creeped up a bit this year. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in the CAPE one, go apply now because it ends in early December. And Nickelodeon has pushed theirs back by several months. So normally they're January, February. They push theirs back to summer.
So don't take anything for granted. Check your deadlines.
Yeah, everything's changing. It's kind of interesting. I'm like, what's going on? Because when things change, it makes me go, oh my gosh, are they dropping that program? but I don't think so. I think they're just revamping things.
Speaking of submissions, article just came out recently about festivals. We did an episode a while back. Session 56 was about a festival strategy, and it has a lot of good information that's applicable here because it talks about watching out for like dubious festivals. And this article talked about some of the worst case scenarios. A woman had been accepted to a festival in London, and she was so excited she bought her tickets and planned her trip and went over there and found out that the festival wasn't happening due to quote unquote issues. She had to like kind of fight with Film Freeway to get some of her money back. But you have to be careful when you're planning these. Make sure your festivals are reputable and established and have good communication. Watch out for festivals that don't list a person, like an actual festival director that you can look up. Always email, ask questions, and make sure they respond with, detailed information. But we'll put the link in the show notes. So check it out. Festivals are great. They're great ways to, get out in front of people and show off your work, but don't be taken advantage of.
And definitely read the reviews. I mean, some people will review and be like, this festival sucks just because they didn't get in. So discount those. But the ones for people who have attended the festivals and been a part of it in whatever capacity, they'll know. And don't be afraid to call a past attendee and be like, hey, did you go to this? What was it like? Mm-hmm. Just because, there are a lot of really, really weird festivals. One thing we found, which I can't remember if we mentioned this in that episode because it was so long ago, but we found when we were applying, a lot of festivals are started by filmmakers just to showcase their own film. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of build a festival around it to, kind of make it a little more legit or make it a bit of an event, there's nothing wrong with that, but you do have to watch out. Some of them just want it.
Yeah, the one story I probably told in the episode was this really cool looking festival on paper, but when I emailed to ask, who runs this festival, who are the judges, where's it held, the person just wrote me back and said, oh, we're just a bunch of people who love movies and we like to rate movies and give out awards. So they're really, for your $20 or whatever it is, not particularly worth it unless some of these are pay to plays too. Oh, watch out for those. Oh, you remember those?
Mm,
The ones are like, are
yeah.
you going to come to our festival? We'll be announcing the
By the
yeah, we'll be
way.
announcing the finalists soon. But are you coming? Yeah, watch out for
Yeah.
those.
And you have to pay for your ticket, and you have to pay for
The
your this and pay for
banquet and
that, and
the yeah and
yeah.
yeah. So watch yourselves out there in festival world.
But speaking of festival world, one interesting thing also from that article is that right now there's only really one festival submission game in town, which is Film Freeway Without a Box
In
closed.
September. Yeah,
And in September, yeah. And right now you can either submit directly to the film festival if they'll let you, or through Film
and
Freeway.
almost all of them say they don't do direct submissions because they don't want to have to deal with people mailing stuff in and DVDs and Blu-rays, and they'd rather just go online and do it. It's much easier.
So definitely do your due diligence, just because, not that there's anything wrong with Film Freeway. It was actually our preferred method, but a monopoly, can lend itself to some
Yeah.
pitfalls.
Oh, I want to tell you about my latest masterclass experience.
Oh, yeah, you've been so good about that. I'm like only 1.5
I've been
classes
trying to
in.
do a lesson a day, and I really enjoyed Ron Howard teaches directing. I finished that recently, and it was interesting as a writer because now I think about the scripts I've written much differently. I have a very visual idea in my mind about how a scene looks, and it's usually I notice from like one perspective. Like I only think of it from the wide shot mostly. And
Mhm.
watching Ron Howard, he actually takes a scene from Frost Nixon and shows how he's directing the cameras and the actors to get all kinds of coverage and doing it different ways. And he does it like, well, if I had a little budget, if I had a small budget, this is what I would do. And if if I had more time, this is what I would do. And really seeing how complex and how varied his his uh, his processes to get different angles and different reactions really made me see how my scenes could really come to life, you know, through camera, through the different angles and the different scenes and the different shots. So it kind of like makes me really want to like think about more than just the person who's talking, I guess is what I'm saying is you really dive into
Yeah.
the whole environment and what's going on in the whole scene to really think about that. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of people standing around talking to each other.
It's funny, we were actually, off camera, off podcast, we were talking about I sent you an article about editing. And I said, I think like a producer when I write, but I don't always think like a director or an editor. And I mean, there's definitely been cases where editing has saved a film. Star Wars, which by the way, this is our first time mentioning Star Wars in a long time. But Star Wars is a great example of that. It's a very well-known Hollywood legend that the editor made Star Wars a new hope, like the amazing film that it was. So I don't always think like a director or an editor when I write, and I wonder if I should.
I would think with our experience with Reclamation is I wish I brought the editor in at the beginning. Well, I actually wound up
Yeah.
doing a lot of the editing with Allison, but our director. But I kind of wish had gotten a really professional editor come in and work on that with me from the beginning. I love how it turned out, but I feel like there's still something there. Maybe another editor could enhance it a little bit. But then again, I also look at it
Mhm.
and go, wow, we did not have as much coverage as I thought we did. So all of that came out of, this masterclass working, watching Ron Howard, direct one scene over and over again to show different ways to do it. So as a writer, it's gonna help me, think about that as I'm writing.
That's really
And you
cool.
also know, I know you're a comedy writer, but I'm like deathly afraid of comedy. So on my next lesson, I'm into the first few lessons of Judd Apatow teaches comedy, and it's really cool. Yeah,
Oh, I am so impressed that you're still going. I finished the Steve Martin class. I'm in the middle of Shonda Rhimes, and if I don't push myself to watch it, I just
Well,
forget.
I'm only on my second class too, but I think it's totally worth it. Again, if you have the time and the resources to try Masterclass, it's quite a unique experience and amazing to have, like you're sitting there talking. Well, you're not talking to, but listening to Ron Howard lecture you on all these different movies he worked on and the different challenges he faced, and it really is kind of inspiring, and it's also extremely informative. So we
Cool.
don't get any kickback from them either. This is
No,
just
this is just
sharing,
us. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, so full disclosure, we've signed up for the Masterclass year-long pass back in April and had
ugh,
super good intentions. I was like, I'm going to watch everything on there. And I
time's
have
running out.
not. So it's just us updating where we are in the journey. I definitely need to get back into it
Get
because
some downtime coming up in the holidays, maybe.
that's true. That's true. And honestly, what I've been seeing of the Shonda Rhimes class is amazing. Like she even has her show Bible up there and stuff. It's just I need to be motivated to sit down and watch, and I'm so not good at that.
Yeah.
Speaking of things to watch with all the streaming services happening, so Disney Plus, which everyone's been talking about, finally launched this month. And it's interesting. There was an article that we were talking about earlier how Disney was pulling a lot of their content from theaters or just not putting it in
Hmm.
theaters and it was only going to go to streaming, and the article was contending, is this going to kill movie theaters, which I don't. Well, we can discuss. Let's discuss.
Well, I don't think it's going to kill movie theaters, and I don't think. I think the big franchises are. They're still going to do theater spectacles. It's part of Hollywood. It's part of the whole experience. And you have directors. You've heard them say this, like Spielberg, Scorsese, Ron Howard, George Lucas, James Cameron. They all are very pro theater, big screen, shared experience, and you're probably not going to see any of their movies going straight to streaming anytime soon. So I don't think any of that is in danger of becoming small screen content anytime soon.
Well,
Plus
I
they're
think
all huge films.
yeah, I think the author of the article though was saying because Disney owns so many properties. So if it pulled not just their direct Disney branded films, but Pixar and Marvel and what have you, Star Wars, everything, then what's left to be in the theater was what they were arguing.
Right. And I mean, there's still tons of movies that are produced every year. Up to 3 or 4 thousand films are made every year, and only a few hundred get theatrical releases. So perhaps this will open up some space for some other movies that have been overlooked that didn't get theatrical releases before.
Hmm.
The theater is still an American experience. It's a thing people love to do. You go out, you have dinner, you see a movie. It's gotten more expensive, so maybe people aren't going as often, but it's still kind of a unique thing that is something families do and people on dates do that I don't think you're going to see disappear anytime soon.
I I don't think it's gonna disappear, but one thing that wasn't in the article, which I think it will be interesting to see how Disney deals with this model. You were saying, for example, Lady and the Tramp, the live action movie is going direct to Disney Plus, or there's a Christmas movie called Noel with Anna Kendrick that's going direct to
Hmm.
Disney Plus. But and it's great. Like if you're a Disney Plus subscriber, you're like, cool. I get to watch all my Disney shows plus these added bonuses of these big theatrical movies with big name actors, which is great. But eventually, all movies have to, they don't have to, but they will be released on home video. And remember back in the day, oh so long ago, you would see a movie in the theaters and it would take maybe like a year and a half to 2 years to be released on home video. And you knew that going in. And you
Hmm.
knew that going in, if it was ever even released on video. And you knew that going in. And so you were like, I have to catch it in the theater or I will never get to see it. Titanic is a great example. That's why it had such a long run because everyone's like, I'm just going to keep going and going and going because who knows when it'll be released on video. But somewhere in the last 10 years, distribution models change. So a movie comes out in the theater for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then bam, it's on DVD within 2 months later. So
Hmm.
I don't, I'm wondering how Disney's going to deal with that distribution model, because if you put, like, say, Lady and the Tramp out and it comes out now, in theory, it should be on DVD by January. Are they just not going to release these films on DVD? How do they keep the people watching in the subscriber
Yeah.
base? Do you know what I mean? Because I'm sure they don't want to lose out on the home video sales.
I mean, the article goes into the math, but if you have a subscriber on your streaming service for $5 or $7 a month, so figure that out, $7 a month over the course of a year, that's $84 a year. Okay, and if the average person sees 3 or 4 of your movies a year, and you take out the cut that the theater takes and all those kinds of distribution costs, you're actually making a lot more money over getting that person to subscribe to your service versus getting them to the theater. So economically, it actually makes sense for them to put more stuff on streaming. How it affects writers in Hollywood is a whole nother aspect to it, though.
But I think you're missing my point, which is,
Okay.
I get that, like, it makes more sense to have people subscribe over the long term. I understand that. But if you, like, okay, if you put, we'll just take the Lady and the Tramp thing out, and you put it out in November, and you just kind of hold on to it for a year before you ever release it on DVD, hoping people subscribe
Hmm.
because they really want to watch it. Do you see what I'm saying? They cannot go back to the old distribution model of waiting a year or two, because everybody else has already bought into the distribution model of releasing it on home video within 2 months.
Sure.
So that's what I'm getting at.
Right. Well, then people know, like you're saying, then people will just wait, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
I think some people will still want to go see things in the theater. I think you have two camps here. So you've got your blockbusters, your big Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Warner Brothers, the big, DC, all those things. People want to see those, like fans really want to see those in the theater right when they're available. They they will probably also watch it on streaming when it comes out. But then your other bucket of movies isn't, I wouldn't call them second tier necessarily, but the lower budget, more indie films, more art films, the Oscar kind of films,
Hmm.
those are all definitely coming out in the theater, especially since things like Netflix have already been banned from the Oscars. So those are definitely coming out in the theater, at least for a while. How long is a good question. And whether it's economical or will people just wait for streaming, I don't know. But there there are audiences that will always go see those at the theaters and then buy it and see it on streaming and do all that kind of stuff because they're fans. And then you have other people that really love film, let's call it cinema, who will go to see things in the theaters, even the small indie theaters, because that's where the writer, producer, director wanted it to be seen. It was written for that venue. And I don't know, as a writer, I just want my stuff produced. I don't usually think about where it's going to be. I am a little more concerned about how I'm going to get paid for it
Hmm.
because that has yet to be seen. What's going to happen with things like back end and royalties are all different when you go to a streaming model. It's pennies versus dollars. When you start dividing up that $7 a month across all your different content, it can get pretty thin. In fact, Disney put out a trailer before they launched that was over 3 hours long that had everything that was going to be on the service when it launched. So just imagine all of those movies. You have to compensate all the writers, the directors, and whoever else is in that in their contracts to get residuals from those. And how do you calculate all that based on plays or subscribers, minutes viewed? And I think we talked about this. The Writers Guild is gearing up for their negotiations with the studios this spring because in May the writers' contract runs out again
Hmm.
with the studios. We could have another strike if they don't come up with a new plan. But I have a feeling this very subject will be a big part of it for writers and eventually actors as well. Will want to know how if their movie is put onto a streaming service, how they're going to be compensated if there's no ticket sales to be had because of it.
Yeah, I guess I kind of wonder. I mean, do they get a percentage of the subscription costs. Like, I know with, for example, TV shows, they had like the Nielsen ratings and they could kind of see like how many people were watching what show at a particular time. But do they have that kind of data on streaming? Or do they just kind of
Oh, they have
assume
tons
that?
of data. It's hard to tell how many people are watching exactly because you don't know if there's multiple people watching, that kind of stuff, because, you could have a room full of people sharing a streaming service or
Mhm.
roommates and that kind of stuff. You have a good idea. You know how many views it's had or how many times it's been watched and watched all the way through. And so they have lots of data on it. It's just a matter of how do you monetize it? How do you calculate it? It's not like YouTube where you have ads where, you get
Mm,
paid per ad kind of
yeah.
thing or paid by clicks. So I'm not sure, but it's definitely going to be on everyone's mind as these negotiations come up.
And the cost could get passed to the subscribers, which would piss them off, but people got
Good
to eat.
point.
Creators got to eat, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And
Hmm.
now for something a little more lighthearted. Today we have a special guest, Aron Coleite. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my gosh, we're so excited to have you. So, Aaron has done a lot. We'll let you give your short IMDb bio, but I know currently you have a show on Netflix. So, catch us up on how you got started right into writing, and then we'll go into the present day.
It's 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 a very long story. As a young boy living in Encino, I only wanted to put pen to paper. No,
Oh.
I always liked writing. I was a comic book nerd. Basically from the age of 12, I had been going to the comic book store every week ever since, and knew that I wanted to write and wanted to write genre stories. Um, I grew up in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, and my fondest memory growing up was my grandma lived in Burbank, and on the way home we would pass by Warner Brothers, and I saw those big, huge posters. I don't know if anybody has seen the Warner Brothers studios, but they have these gigantic posters that are still there, that had always had their movies that were coming out. And I remember driving past being like, that's what I want to do one day. I want to know what goes inside that place because those are my favorite movies. And I want a movie poster up on that wall. And so I've kind of been trying to do that ever since. I started as a writer's assistant, and a showrunner's assistant on a long time ago, what feels like a long time ago, on a show called Party of Five, which is getting its
Yep.
reboot right
Reboot.
now.
The
So
Hmm.
original Party of Five, yeah.
I was an assistant on the original Party of Five, and worked as a writer's assistant for about a decade, until I got a chance to be a staff writer on a show called Crossing Jordan, that was run by a guy named Tim Kring, that a lot of
Hmm.
people are aware of. And I happened to be the nerd on the writing staff when he was doing this little show called Heroes. And he was like, hey, you go to the comic book store, you're a nerd. I want to talk to you about this idea. And I was like, I want to talk to you about this idea. This is fantastic. This is the best thing I've ever heard. And people have to remember, like, when Tim was talking about doing Heroes, this was before the Marvel Cinematic Universe even existed. At that point, Marvel was even in bankruptcy as a company. The comic book company was bankrupt, um, and so this was such a unique, an original idea. So I just wanted to do everything that I could to be a part of it. And kind of right when I got started, as a staff writer, Tim was making Heroes, and I got to be in there for the ground floor, and that really helped propel my writing career. Because from there, I was able to do Heroes, have done some movie adaptations, got to work on Star Trek Discovery, and has led me here to doing my Netflix show called Daybreak.
Wow, this I don't want to fanboy out a little bit here, but I loved Heroes, love Star Trek. I've been watching Star Trek since I was a kid with my mom, so from the original series. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit in awe right now, but I'll try to put my writer's hat back on. As a someone who's worked in network and in now on Netflix, how different is that experience? What is it like to produce and write for broadcast versus like a streamer?
It is different, and it's not different in a lot of ways. I think that I think the thing that's changed the most is the culture around creating television right now. And I don't think that has anything to do with necessarily streaming or broadcast. I think it has to do with there there are so many shows and so many ways to watch shows right now. And the thing that I would take away from my Netflix experience, and we had just the best executives to work with possible in Cole Galvin and Stacey Silverman. And they really got on board very early with the show that we were pitching them and that we wanted to make. And that was the most important thing. I don't know if you've seen Daybreak yet. I don't know if your viewers have seen it. It's an insane show. It
Yeah,
is.
I've seen the pilot so far. It's pretty hilarious. If you like Zombieland, it's got a really fun vibe to it. It's no, you've done a really unique, fun thing there, actually.
It's really weird, and I hope you keep watching it because it gets even stranger.
Really?
Yeah, we take a lot, of risks, and certainly, it is built for a binge experience, but it is like it gets even crazier. And
I can't wait.
and my experience has been, in network television and broadcast television, certainly historically, if you wanted to take risks or you wanted to do something a little bit out there, it's met with reticence, and it's met with apprehension, because it's people are fearful of the unknown, and people are fearful of taking some big swings, and because it might not work. And that has been the opposite case here at Netflix. It has been 100%, partially because I might be a little bit of a wounded dog or poorly trained from years of doing this. But like, we would put things in scripts and be expecting, oh, we're going to totally get a note on this. They're never going to let us do this. This is just too crazy. And we never got that from Netflix. In fact, if anything, they were just like, no, keep going. Like, this is fantastic. We love what you're doing. And having that level of support, knowing that we weren't getting, pushback from the network, but rather encouragement to keep on going, and had a real transparent and ongoing wonderful conversation with them about how we're making the show and what the show is meant to accomplish. That was an amazing creative process for me.
We definitely want to talk about Daybreak because there's so many interesting things going on with the show. But I want to go back real quick because one of the things you mentioned when you were talking about like heroes and just being into genre writing was that was not popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting because you've made a career out of the curve didn't even exist because the curve wasn't even on the horizon. So how do you because people I think try to write for like, oh, I'm going to write something marketable, but you didn't really go that route, did you? And yet it still worked.
I think there's a lot of luck and timing, involved in that because Crossing Jordan, which is a wonderful show, and has, if you look at Tim Cregan, like the guy who created Crossing Jordan created Heroes, you would never imagine that could come from the same brain, and yet it did. Crossing Jordan was a procedural, kind of cop show at the end of the day. It was solving a mystery every single week. It couldn't be more mundane. I think, but I think like I got to come up right at a time when the tide was changing. Right when I started on Crossing Jordan, Alias had launched, and soon after Alias, Lost had launched. And I think that, what JJ and Damon and those guys had done was started to change the viewers to make them all a little bit more nerdy and a little bit more geeky, and to be able to accept genre television in a way that no one was accepting it before, not in a mainstream kind of fashion. because it was presented in a really, palatable package. It wasn't, where I used to have to get genre television was syndicated, was whether I was watching Star Trek Next Generation, or some things on cable, but basically it didn't exist. And I got it from certainly the comic books that I loved consistently. But I think those guys, kind of did this amazing magic trick with a very broad audience, was to get them to understand, like, genre storytelling is really cool. And it doesn't have to be, people in capes in order to just be a superhero story, or to be a sci-fi story, or to be a fantasy story. And because I kind of came up right at that time, I was able to really transfer that into a nice career for myself, and I'm thankful for it every single day.
What was your inspiration for Daybreak?
So my inspiration for Daybreak was multifold. One is, so my co-creator on the show and the director of the first 2 episodes, Brad Payton, who is an incredible director. He had actually found the original graphic novel that the show is based on, and he had written a feature version of the graphic novel. I was meeting with him. We shared a mutual agent at the time, and the agent sent me Daybreak as a sample of Brad's writing to read, to understand what this is something he was into. We were actually supposed to talk about a different comic book altogether. And I got to the meeting, and I was like, look, I know we're supposed to talk about this comic book, but really I just want to talk about your Daybreak script and what's going on with it. And can we just spend the whole entire meeting talking about that? And it was an uncouth thing to do, but I just saw something in his script, and the script had actually gone out to town at the time and didn't get any traction, because it was kind of right after Warm Bodies came out. So there was this kind of, really niche area of horror comedy and zomcoms that were kind of not exactly working. They're very niche with Zombieland or Warm Bodies or Shaun of the Dead. I mean, these are things that I adore and love, but weren't generating very big audiences. And his script, Brad's script, was kind of closer in tone to that. It wasn't exactly, balls out humorous, but it had this thing, which was this narrator who was breaking the fourth wall in a Ferris Bueller type fashion, and who was kind of very optimistic about the apocalypse. And I just love that. I think we had seen so many, apocalypses and dystopias that are just, they smell bad. Like, you can see the stink lines coming through your television set when you're watching them. And I loved this concept that one person looked at the apocalypse as if it was the best thing that ever happened to him.
Yeah, well, he's Canadian, so.
And he's Canadian, he is Canadian, but it's also but what it tapped into for me was, that's how I felt when I was in high school and junior high. I had these fantasies of man, it would be great if the world ended, because then you could just totally reinvent yourself. You could be whoever you wanted. You didn't have to be laid down with all the trappings of what other people perceived you to be. You had an opportunity to change. And there was a movie that played all the time on HBO when I was in junior high, called Night of the Comet. That was, I don't know if you guys remember that movie. Or if you
it starred Robert Beltran, who was on Star Trek Voyager.
Yes. And in that movie, it was basically right after Halley's Comet, and they're like, oh, how do we use Halley's Comet as a way to tell a horror movie? And all the parents basically evaporate, kids are left, and they have a great time. And that always stuck with me, because I always felt like, well, that's what people would do if the world ended and only kids were left. They would go balls out and have a great time. And so we started building the show based kind of on that mutually shared experience of can we create something that is a wish fulfillment version of the apocalypse, where we could have horror, but we could also have humor and kind of blend it with heart as well.
Cool. And an article came across our desk from Variety saying that there is a podcast tie-in called The Only Podcast Left. So I believe Daybreak debuted right before Halloween, right? So this podcast is coming out November, and then it'll be everywhere in December. So that's interesting. You're doing a
Yeah.
tie-in thing. Talk a little bit about that.
So it's really cool. The first episode came out on Spotify. It's going to be exclusively on Spotify until December, and then it goes everywhere. You have to watch the show, and then this is a great supplemental material, and I could talk a little bit more about that. Doing supplemental material and doing additional content was nothing, relatively new to me. One of the things I did on Heroes was we created these first series of web comics to go along with every episode.
I read all of those. Those are fantastic.
Thank you. And those were so much fun because we got to tell there's these alternate stories to do, and we got to work with these great artists and even collect it in a graphic novel form. And so Netflix this summer when we were doing posts on the show, Netflix came to me and they were like, look, we want to get into podcasting, specifically getting into narrative podcasting. And we want, Daybreak to be the first show to do that. I have to admit, I was ridiculously apprehensive about doing it at first. Partially because I'm a big podcast listener. I do not listen to a lot of narrative podcasts because, I'm basically spending my time listening to stuff like Pod Save America and Serial and Keep It and stuff that has a much more organic, reason for talking and communicating to the audience in the fashion that they're doing it, similar to what we're doing right now. And doing narrative is this nice throwback to old radio shows, but I didn't want to do something that felt inorganic, and I wanted to have a real good reason to exist. And if when you watch Daybreak, when you see it, I think the two things that are pillars of our storytelling are really doing very big visuals, very cinematic style storytelling, and being really irreverent. And this felt like you're taking away one of my major tools of visual storytelling, and you're tying your hand behind my back, so I have to figure out how to do this with just audio. And then then I had this really strange thought of I think I know how to do this, and it was a way of, one of the things that I continuously listen to is fan podcasts of shows, and it kind of started after listening to Talking Dead and watching Talking Dead. There was a couple Game of Thrones podcasts that I listened to, because I love how those fan podcasts really create fan communities. So you could talk about theories, and you could talk about what the writers are thinking. You could talk about all manner of where the show's going and shipping. I just loved, participating in that. And I found a way to do that with Daybreak in a really organic fashion. So it's a little surreal, and basically, just the basic pitch of it is that Daybreak is about, the world ends, only the kids survive, the adults are gone, and they form into their various tribes. And one of the tribes, the tribe that we follow in the podcast, is the AV Club, who, of course, after the bombs fell, their manner of survival is they hooked up all the cameras all around Glendale, California, in order to survive, so that they could see what was coming around the corner. Are there ghoulies coming? Is there mutant pugs? Are there a gang of marauding kids? And what they wound up doing by hooking up all these cameras is watching what was going on around Glendale. And so they use that to become addicted voyeurs to the same show that we've been watching on Netflix. And so they've been watching the same show that we've been watching, and they decided to make a fan podcast of that exact show. So
that's fun.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did you write the podcast concurrently with the live action show, or are you running two writers' rooms, or how does that all work?
We did it after. So we were able to kind of comment on the show that I already knew existed and how it existed. I was in a fashion running 2 writers' rooms in a way, but not really. What we did was the season 2 writers' room has just been starting up, and we don't have our official pickup for season 2, but we have a writers' room going. And as we had that writers' room going, they asked us to do this podcast. So we're thinking about season 2, and season 1 is basically finished and shot and edited. And I used all of our writers, including the support staff, to be able to find a way to do this podcast and to write it simultaneously as we're doing all this work at the same time. One of the things that was really important to me was that our writer's assistants, our writer's PA, our script coordinator, like everybody got an opportunity to actually write on the podcast as the rest of the writers were working on season 2 of the show, as a way of kind of giving back to our assistant staff. There's a lot going on right now with Hollywood assistants and abuse of Hollywood assistants, and I was a Hollywood assistant. And one of the things that's really important to me is always like giving back to the assistants, giving them opportunities to write, giving them opportunities to learn. They're not here, people don't come to Los Angeles to be an assistant, to get me coffee and to get the writer's room, lattes and lunch. They're here to be writers. And this was a wonderful opportunity to get them actual experience writing, so that we could all do our jobs and create some wonderful content. It was just, they had an opportunity to write and to share their voices.
That's super cool. I don't know that I could start as an assistant. I just turned 50 actually. What advice would you have to, we have a lot of, writers who are starting out, listen to our podcast. What advice would you give them as far as, work trying to get into, writing for television?
Certainly, even being 50, I think being an assistant is still a good job. And I think, look, when I was a writer assistant, it's harder to get a writer's assistant job. It feels like it's harder to get a writer's assistant job than it is to get a writing job, because there's only one writer's assistant in a room, and there's usually anywhere between 5 to 10 writers in a room. So it's a hard job to get. I think the advice that I often give is like, there's 2 things. I would fundamentally put it down to 2 things. There is, if you find a single contact in the industry, take them out to lunch, ask them questions, get coffee with them, learn their story, learn how they made it in. And when you have that contact, ask that person for 2 or 3 more contacts. It's all about, getting to know people in this industry, and that's how you're going to find the jobs, and that's how you're going to find the opportunities, because it's still a who do you know, and how do you know them? And there's so many opportunities for that to happen. You just need to kind of get your foot in the door with one person. One good meeting can generate so many other meetings. The other thing I would also add to that is people have to keep writing. It's so important to consistently generate material. I just looked at it the other day in my garage. I have a very unfortunate stack of scripts in my garage from the time when I was an assistant, when I wrote, spec after spec after spec. I had a Buffy spec script and a Law & Order SVU spec script and a Shield spec script and even a Jackie Chan Adventure spec script. I would just continuously write to try to get an agent, to try to get representation, to try to get anybody to kind of pay attention to me. But it was also about just learning how to write television, learning how to write any show I could by studying it and investing the time in making it and making these scripts, even though like all these scripts, they're probably pretty terrible. But they gave me a basis of education of like, oh, this is how television's constructed. This is how to write a scene. This is how to write an into a scene and an out of a scene. This is how to write a good cliffhanger. And that amount of practice and that amount of work I do believe, helps transform you into a better writer.
That is amazing advice. And thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
taking the time to chat with us. This has been amazing, just learning all about it.
Oh man, it was such a pleasure talking to you. This was a great way to spend my afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
If people want to get a hold of you, or if want to follow you, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram. They can find me on Twitter. I'm on both. I think on Instagram I'm Aron Eli Coleite, and on Twitter I'm Aron Coleite. You can find me in both places.
Perfect.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you.
Can't wait for the podcast.
Absolutely. Enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Both of them.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you follow us online, and we'll see you in December.